All right, welcome everybody to our event. Let me share my screen real quick. This event is now being recorded, just to let everybody know. Also, if you hear any background noise, just excuse the background noise. We have a dog in the house. He's very playful and a lot of energy. So yeah, so welcome everybody. Let me see. Alejandro, are you able to let people in?
I'm not seeing anyone else coming in at the moment. Oh wait, there it is. Yep.
All right, Alejandro, you got it. You got it, Alejandro. Alrighty then. Are you able to see the screen right now?
Yes, sir.
Everyone see the screen? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, everybody, we're getting started right now. Thank you all for joining us this evening for this important event hosted by the Resilient Upsilon chapter of Psi Sigma Phi Multicultural Fraternity Incorporated in collaboration with the Casa Alitas program and BCU students and faculty on what it means to support La Frontera, the border, a conversation on the crisis affecting thousands of people at the border. So who am I? My name is Kevin Armas Rodas. I was born and raised in El Salvador and immigrated to the United States in June of 2012. I am currently the Vice President of the Resilient Upsilon chapter at BCU for the academic year of 2020-2021. I am a senior student majoring in interdisciplinary studies with a concentration in international relations and race, and a minor in sociology. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about my organization. We are a multicultural fraternity founded in 1990 at Montclair State University, a New Jersey City University. The Resilient Upsilon chapter is the first in the Commonwealth of Virginia and the latest addition to our growing organization as a multicultural fraternity. We believe in the multiculturalism is not limited to the physical composition of an organization. It is rather a philosophy that embraces any and all aspects of cultural identity with unconditional love and respect. Cultural identity includes, but is not limited to, location, gender, race, nationality, history, sexual orientation, or religious beliefs. Once again, thank you for joining us. And now I will be introducing and also these are some of the pictures from our trip to Casa Alitas, which we will get to learn more in a little bit. And now I will introduce our panelists. We have Sarah Reed from Casa Alitas, pronouns she, hers. Sarah Reed currently works for Church World Service, plays full-time as the program coordinator at Casa Alitas in Tucson, Arizona. Sarah has a master's in psychology and advanced certificates specializing in trauma.
You're muted.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Yeah.
Was I muted the entire time?
You were muted for like 10 seconds.
Okay. So, Sarah, sorry about that, everybody. Technical difficulties. But let me start again. Sarah Reed currently works for Church World Service, plays full-time as the program coordinator of Casa Alitas in Tucson, Arizona. Sarah has a master's in psychology and advanced certificates specializing in trauma. She has worked with immigrant and refugees in varying functions for over 10 years and has been at Alitas officially for a year. She is passionate about advocacy and social justice issues, as well as the service towards the least of these. Sarah, thank you for being here today. Also, with us today, we have Professor Anita Nadal, pronouns she, her. Anita Nadal received a BA magna cum laude in Spanish from Virginia Commonwealth University. She has studied abroad extensively. Her studies have taken her to Panama, Mexico, Spain, and the Dominican Republic. In 2005, she received the Who's Whom Among American Teachers Award and the Distinguished Service Award for Outstanding Community Service related to Spanish language and culture training in the Richmond area. She has presented research at the MACLAS. Ms. Nadal earned a Master's of Liberal Arts degree in Latin American and International Cultural Studies with honors from the University of Richmond. Her interests includes research in transculturation, cultural awareness, and immigration. She is the 2013 recipient of the International Strategic Initiative Award. Verde, efficient use of energy resources in Europe and the benefit of alternative energy resources in immigrant communities. She's also the recipient of the 2014-15 Welcoming Richmond. This grant helped provide civic and language classes for over 200 immigrants and refugees. Some became United States citizens with the support from this program. She is also the 2018 BCU Presidential Award for Community Multicultural Enrichment, PACME, and Ray's Melton Award. Professor Nadal, thank you for being here today. And now we also have some, in this panel, some students from BCU. Let's see, quick. We have Megan Moody, BCU alum, pronouns she, her. Megan Moody lived in Enfield, Connecticut for 20 years before relocating to the Virginia area in 2014. Since then, she has gotten her bachelor's degree in international studies with a concentration in social justice and minor in history. Megan graduated in May 2020 and has written papers such as The Other, Dehumanizing Immigrant, Romanticizing Colonial Thoughts from Northern Europe's Thoughts to the United States, Rose-Colored Lenses, and The United States of America, Legal, Racial, and Ethnic Cleansing. Megan, my friend, thank you for being here today. We also with us today have Kelly Nguyen, BCU student, pronouns she, her. Kelly Nguyen is currently a senior at BCU studying international studies with a concentration in social justice and political science with a concentration in international relations. She is also minored in Spanish and gender, sexuality, and women's studies. She hopes to go to law school and become an immigrant lawyer. In her free time, she loves to bike, scrapbook, and listen to podcasts. Kelly, my friend, thank you for being here today. With us also we have Nicole Den, BCU student, pronouns they, them. Nicole Den is currently a sophomore at BCU in the social work program. They are also in training to become a peer recovery specialist. They are passionate about prison abolition and hope to work with teenagers navigating dual diagnosis. In her free time, Nicole loves to knit, make signs, and look at antique quilts. Nicole, thank you for being here today. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Michelle Miguel, BCU student, pronouns she, her. Michelle will be graduating this fall semester with a bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in sociology. During her free time, she likes to be active and spend time with her dog. Michelle is also an active member in the community and enjoys volunteering. She hopes to start her own nonprofit that helps underrepresented children in low-income areas. Michelle, thank you for being here today, friend. So, now that we have introduced our panelists, let me stop sharing my screen real quick. Perfect. I can see everybody. I'm so happy that everyone's here. So we shall get started. So let me get 1 second, everybody. So just to be everyone know, this event will most likely run more than an hour. And I just wanted to apologize and ask for everyone to reserve an extra 30 minutes after 8 p.m. to stay if you have any more questions. So this event will be divided into 3 different parts and 3 different topics. And each panelist has been assigned to speak during these 3 topics. So the first topic that we have today is Casa Alitas. So Sarah Reed, I'm gonna give you the floor. And the question is, what is Casa Alitas program and how did it start? You have 5 to 7 minutes.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you again for hosting this evening and for each of you for showing up and just seeing your faces and your names for those whose faces I can't see is very encouraging to me. Working down here at the border to know that there are people far away who are concerned about what's happening here. So thank you for being here. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And as I do so, I'm going to mention that I have a very unreliable mic, so if at any point I start cutting out, just let me know so I can fix it for you, okay? You'll probably have to just come off mute because I won't be able to see you. So Casa Alitas, this actually is one kind of an older picture, what it used to look like. I'll show you in a minute what it looks like now. I think I have that in here. But we are a nonprofit organization that started back in 2014. It's a very grassroots type model of organization, a humanitarian effort really to address a need in our city. Tucson is about an hour and a half from the border of Mexico. And back in 2014, just a group of people, well-meaning people here in Tucson became aware of immigrants that were being dropped off at the Greyhound bus station after being released from Border Patrol and ICE custody. And they would be dropped off there with no idea of where to go, how to get where they were going, no money, no English, no phone, just left there, and usually right in the middle of the night. So what people started doing was going and helping them make phone calls and helping them buy bus tickets and providing translation for them and bringing them food and eventually bringing them home, helping them have a place to stay for the night. And Casa Alitas was really born from that movement of just people wanting to help what was going on. It's important because as we go through this, we're going to talk about how things have changed this last year in particular, but the last couple of years under this current administration. It's important to understand the way that things used to work back when we started and for the first 3 years or so. That basically if a family would either cross over the border or present at a port of entry, and they would ask for asylum for whatever reason, and they would have be in temporary holding with Border Patrol in a Border Patrol facility for a little while where they had their background check and what's called a credible fear interview, which is basically what they do to decide if somebody has a claim for asylum or not. If they pass that, then they would go to processing, usually at an ICE or immigration's detention center. They'd get all their documents and everything sent there, and then back before all of this changes that happened, they'd be released to a shelter like Alitas. When the height of this was going on and there were really thousands of people coming and seeking asylum here, primarily due to instability in Central America and Southern Mexico, there were 32 different shelters across the US-Mexico border waiting to receive the people coming through. Once they came to us, for example, at Alitas, we actually have a good relationship with ICE, so they would bring them directly to our door. We'd bring them in, give them food, clothing, hygiene supplies, a place to shower, housing, support, so forth. We'd help them contact their sponsor, which is usually a family member somewhere in the US, and arrange their travel. And then make sure that they get to the bus station or the airport for their trip. So this is the way things used to look. And in the next 2 sections after we go through this, we'll look at how things look different now. When we started out, we started with a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house, which we still have. And we could house up to about 20 people there with kids and babies and that sort of thing. And it was a good space for a while. And then we outgrew that space. We started getting, instead of receiving maybe 2 to 4 families a day, we started receiving 20 to 30 to 40 families a day. That little house wasn't sufficient enough, so we moved to a couple different buildings, and then we were in the monastery for a while, which was an actual old monastery from like a 100-year-old building, beautiful building that we were allowed to use for a while. But it was an older building, it was falling apart, the plumbing died on us, the electricity was in and out all the time. So eventually we had to move out of there, and we moved into our current space. So that's what our entrance looks like now. You can see in the middle, we just had this beautiful mural installed for us. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And you can see a few other little pictures of what our center looks like at this point. What's really fascinating about the Welcome Center is that it's actually half of a juvenile detention center building. And the county gave us that space rent-free, utility-free. They weren't using it, and they said that we could have it to house our guests. And there was a lot of skepticism when we moved in there. How can you make a detention center feel welcoming for people who are coming out of these really horrible ICE and Border Patrol type facilities, which I'm sure you've seen pictures of on the news. But I think you can tell even from these pictures that we put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into how we design those spaces to make them feel welcoming and warm, to take away that kind of institutional feel and to make it a place where people could come and just relax. And recover and be prepared for moving on their journey. So we've been there since August of last year, August 2019. Previously, prior to COVID, we had a capacity of about 250 people that we could house there. We would not house that many right now because of the COVID risk, but that was our capacity before. And for the for the end of 2019, while we were there, we were many nights full to capacity with guests. So it's been a really great space for us that we've been able to continue with those same services and the same mission and goals that we started out with in the beginning. This is just a picture of some of our volunteers. This is actually Christmas morning. So these are volunteers who showed up on Christmas because ICE doesn't take holidays and they love to release people on holidays. So on Thanksgiving, we had a huge group of people come in, and on Christmas, we had a huge group of people come in on New Year's Day. And anyway, so these are all the volunteers that were helping us on Christmas. Obviously this was pre-COVID because there's no mask or anything. Everybody's all close together, but it just gives you an idea of the people we help or who help. And when we used to get large groups, we would have as many as 100 to 150 volunteers per day helping to serve the guests that we had coming through. So that is my section 1 about Casa Alitas. Kind of a quick overview of who we are and what we do. But basically, I think the important takeaway is the fact that we as a group of volunteers and staff and those who work with our population, we want to create a space that really restores dignity, a space that's trauma informed in the sense that we don't want to further harm or further traumatize our guests. We want to provide a space of healing and relief for them. And I think that just really because of the quality of people that we work with, the volunteers and just the heart that they have for this kind of work, I think we managed to do that for the most part. So it's really a privilege and an honor to get to do the kind of work that I do. So I'm going to end there. I told them I could talk about Casa Alitas forever, so I'm going to let some of our others talk as well.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. So our next question is for Professor Nadal. I just wanted to also, talk about to you, Professor Nadal, about what was your experience at Casa Alitas?
Well, let me start with, I first heard about Casa Alitas on NPR. I was driving into VCU one morning and I heard the announcer for NPR with a very enthusiastic voice say, there's this amazing work that is going on in Tucson, Arizona. And you know how I am, right? And I'm driving to VCU and I was like, oh, and they're doing such great things. And it's so wonderful to see this is going on in the United States right now. And so as soon as I got to VCU, I ran to the computer and I said, what is this Casa Alitas? I gotta find out about this. So I read about it. And then at that time is when, as Sarah mentioned, they were in that old monastery, which also made for a great story. And I think that's part of the reason too that it went national, right? And NPR, the whole story, right? And so then after that, since I teach service learning through the Spanish department in the School of World Studies, then I thought, we absolutely have to let students from VCU, from the East Coast, from Richmond, Virginia, right? Be able to see that, live that, and know what it's like to be on the border. And so happily, the chair of my department was very, very excited about that too. And he said, Anita, do you think you can take a group down to the border? And I was like, yeah, of course. For me, whenever someone tells me, do you think you can do that? I don't blink. Yeah, we can do that. Because my father was in the Air Force, and when I was like 8 years old, we traveled from New York to Panama in a station wagon. You young people don't even know what that looks like, right? You can look it up in Google it. But anyway, 7 kids, mom and dad in a station wagon, and we went through 11 states and 7 countries, right? And so I've been to over 30 countries in my travels. So for me, the world is my backyard. I don't have limits when it comes to doing things and going places. So I like to share that with my students, right? And so right away, I sent out emails and asked students who would like to go down, created a course called La Frontera. And then happily, there was a total of, I think about 12 of us, something like that. And so when we went down to the border, we had probably about 3 or 4 goals that we wanted to accomplish. And the first one was to go to Casa Alitas, right? And be able to work there. One of the things that really appealed to me too as an educator, and Sarah was amazing with this, is you want your students to be able to do something. You know what I mean? We didn't want it to be just that, like going to a museum and you just kind of look at everything and then you leave. No. We wanted the students to be a part of it. And every student, Sarah made sure that every student was able to contribute, right? By building a shed, decorating some of those rooms that were like former detention rooms. So it gave great pleasure to the students to be able to know that they were transforming this room that was once a room for youth, right, in detention, now being decorated with beautiful colors that would be appealing to the Latinx people that would stay there. And that was another point that really impressed me as a person who my graduate studies have been in cultural competency. What really, really grabbed me was as soon as you walk into their space, it's a very welcoming, very warm. You have the bright yellows and the reds. You have flags from all the different Spanish-speaking countries. You have the drawings from the children. You have the chairs and the food and the language and just absolutely every aspect. Me as an Afro-Latina woman, right, walking into the space, I felt right away welcome. And I can't say that about every space that I walk into. And I'm sure most of you have felt this too, those of us who are minorities, right? Some spaces you walk into, you get stared at from your feet, from the toes all the way to the tip of your head. Yes? Well, Casa Alitas, no matter where you come from, right? You are treated with love and respect and dignity. And we don't see a lot of that during these times either. So I could go on and on too about Casa Alitas, but Kevin, let me know how I am on my time.
Thank you so much, Professor Nadal, on that. I definitely agree. I agree with that. So my next question is to Michelle and Nicole. My question is, on the trip that we were privileged to do to Casa Alitas in Arizona, what did you learn and what was your experience like?
Do you want to go? Okay, I'll go. I think the experience overall was something that I kind of always just wanted to experience. So I think this was a really good opportunity. One thing that I like, at first I was kind of bummed out because I thought we were going to see like a lot of people at the shelter. But then I started to realize how important it was that every little thing is important. Like not just working closely with them, but also like decorating and also doing the shed and all that was just also really important, because just like how everybody's said that it does look like a detention center. So it does feel welcoming to all other cultures and other families and other people that are coming to the border. So I thought it was a really good experience just in general. And I hope to go back again, hopefully with Sarah.
We'd love to have you, any of you.
Nicole?
It was a really amazing experience for me. It gave me a vision of what community care looks like and what we can do when we see a need. Because I really dream of a world without having oppressive institutions such as detention centers, and it was kind of empowering in a way, and made me excited to go back and take what I've learned to Richmond. And I learned just a lot about the obstacles, and like just something that stuck out to me was the issue of there are a lot of people that might immigrating that might be native indigenous language speakers, so they don't speak Spanish or English, and that they are like the most vulnerable people, and just all of these different things that I just had no idea before. But yeah, it just was really powerful to witness what community care and action looks like.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole, for that. And I feel like all of us that went to that trip can really relate, and being present and seeing this family was very touching. I even had the opportunity to translate for this family who were at Casa Alitas. So I was very, privileged enough to be able to help them. It was a very humbling experience for sure. As much as I want to keep talking about Casa Alitas, because I love the program so much, we do have to move on to our next topic. But before I go ahead and do that, if anyone in the audience has any questions, you can put it in the chat, and our panelists will be answering those questions through the chat as well. And towards the end of the meeting, we're going to have a chance for us to have a conversation with you guys if you have any other questions. So moving to our next topic. The second topic we're going to talk about is the border and detention centers during the pandemic. So Sarah, my question for you is, what is the state of the border and the detention centers under the pandemic?
Okay, and I did see there's a question in the chat, but I'll get that to you in a second. So let me go back to y'all can still hear me okay? My microphone is cooperating today. Let me go back to my slideshow here. So the first thing to understand about the border and detention centers right now is you have likely heard, especially if you've been following all the political stuff going on right now, or even the last couple of debates, you probably heard that the border is closed. And that is sort of true and sort of not true. A lot of people are able to get past through the border legally, back and forth. People with with green cards, with certain types of visas, with US passports, are able to travel back and forth across the border freely all the time. Most of the cities that straddle the border have people that live in those cities, either on the Mexican side or the US side, that travel back and forth to do work and commerce and school all the time. So in that sense, the border is not closed. As much as they like to say, let's thank the president for keeping the border closed. The border is closed to people without any type of visa. So it's basically closed to asylum seekers and to those who are seeking status here in our country. So currently, what we are seeing is that, you know, I talked about how previously when people would cross the border and ask for asylum or present at a port of entry and ask for asylum, they're no longer able to do that. So if they cross over, they can't present at a port of entry pretty much at all, but if they cross over into our country, they're either immediately sent back or they're put on a deportation plane, either immediately sent back into Mexico or put on a deportation plane back to their country of origin. So that is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that the border is not exactly closed like they say it is, and it has very little to do with COVID at all. This is much more of something that has to do with wanting to keep out asylum seekers. So that is part of it. But the other thing, I put a few slides on here about the detention centers, because while our news has been occupied with the coming election and with COVID and with other stories, there's been a lot happening at these detention centers that is really atrocious and that is not getting the type of attention that it should be receiving, considering what's been happening. This is just a list of some of the centers. We have two, these are the biggest ones, the biggest ICE detention centers. We have two here in Arizona that are about an hour from us. We have a third as well, but it's a little bit smaller. You don't have any out there in Virginia. I think the closest to you would be Pennsylvania.
Farmville,
probably.
there's one in Farmville.
In Virginia? Oh, it's
Yeah.
a small one probably.
Yeah.
Okay, none of these are in Virginia, I'll say that. But these are what the numbers look like. So this is fiscal year 2019. The average daily population to detention across all the different detention centers was 50,000 people. The number in total of different individuals that they had throughout the year, over 510,000, almost 511. And then if you look at how much this costs, okay, if you look at the budgets, $3.2 billion, that's US taxpayer money that is going towards these detention centers to house these people. Now, let me clarify this. These are not criminals that are being housed in these detention centers. These are immigrants. These are people without legal status currently. These are undocumented people or people waiting their asylum cases that are sitting in detention for sometimes years, even though they have committed absolutely no crime against the US. A great percentage of them have not committed a single crime. Some of them committed the crime of crossing into the border unauthorized, which most of the time is considered a misdemeanor offense, but nevertheless, they are held in these detention centers for a very long time. And we are paying for it as taxpayers, billions of dollars. This is a very big business, and it's primarily held to private companies that run these centers. About 81% of them are run by private companies. So there's 215 centers overall across the country. And then you have this number at the bottom here, number of migrants who have died in these centers since 2003, which is 214. There's a, what was the article? There was a story out about 8 children who have died within just the last year in US custody in these detention centers. So there's definitely, the biggest concern really, besides the fact that they should not be being detained, in my opinion, is the fact that they're not being treated or cared for properly. This is a graph showing the number of COVID cases in ICE custody. So if you remember, there's 215 sites, and these are the number of confirmed cases. Now, a lot of this detention centers aren't even testing, so the numbers are probably a lot higher than this, but these are the numbers that have been verified, and you can see how it's steadily climbing. And the reason it's steadily climbing is because they are doing nothing to prevent it from climbing. They're not giving PPE to the detainees. They are not giving any kind of ability to social distance. They're not cleaning their spaces. They're not providing proper health care, no prevention whatsoever. And so the cases are skyrocketing. They're hotbeds, these centers, for COVID. Currently, if you Google this, you will find all of these. There's a long list of lawsuits as well as allegations against ICE for the treatment of the detainees in their care. So these 500,000 people that went through their care this last year, 50,000 on any given day. Medical neglect, as I said, they're not doing anything to stop the spread of COVID, and that's just a drop in the bucket. You hear lots of stories about people who needed to see a doctor and they didn't get to see one. They weren't allowed to go, they weren't taken anywhere, nobody came to see them. Lack of access to COVID education, means of prevention, I mentioned that already. Mental health neglect, they don't provide counselors, trauma services for the most part. Occasionally there's maybe a certain case where a lawyer is able to advocate for that, but primarily they're not offered that kind of support. And keep in mind that a lot of these people came through all kinds of different crises. You know, they left their country for a reason. They probably passed through different kinds of crises and traumatic events on their way here. And then just being in ICE in and of itself, it's not really a place that promotes mental health, but they're not providing any kind of service to support people's mental health. We've heard lots of allegations of ICE giving what seems to be intentionally giving fake or wrong information to people, which means that they miss their court dates, or they're given the wrong date, or they're given the wrong courthouse to go to, or they're not told that they have to go to court, or they're not given the paperwork that they need. ICE also confiscates their documents, passports in particular, which means it makes it very hard for them to travel. And this is something that we see over and over again. Not providing appropriate translation services. I think Nicole, it was you who mentioned about the indigenous language services and so forth, which we really at Alitas take very seriously. We think someone should always be provided services in the language they're most comfortable in, and if they're in their lengua materna, like their maternal tongue. And in immigrations, that's not always the case. Sometimes they berate the people for not speaking English and not understanding when they try to talk to them in English. I actually just saw this yesterday. We got a new person brought to us by ICE, and the guard was like yelling at her in English, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure she doesn't understand you. So I was translating for her. I mean, I laugh, but it's not funny. Like, you know, it's just one of those things where you have to laugh or it's just gonna kill you eventually. But it's but the indigenous languages as well. A lot of these people are from Central America and Southern Mexico, where they don't speak Spanish. They speak their indigenous Mayan languages. And so they don't understand, even if people try to speak to them in Spanish. This is a huge problem in court as well. And later I'll talk about the MPP program, but one of the things that was a big problem with that is they would provide Spanish translation for everybody, regardless of what your language is. So if you speak very little to no Spanish, but you're from Guatemala, they're still going to just translate everything for you in Spanish and not even try to find somebody who speaks your native language. So that's obviously a big issue. There's a recent case that just came out where they're alleging that ICE tortured some people to sign their voluntary deportation orders. That group in that lawsuit, I believe they're from Africa. But we've heard stories from people just here across the border, here in our side of the border, on our portion of the border, saying that they like saw guards break people's fingers or try to force them to sign paperwork saying that they were okay with their voluntary deportation, even though the people were clearly saying that they did not feel safe to leave, to be deported or go back. There's a case, you can see it here, pending in El Paso, where they're alleging systematic or ritual sexual abuse of detainees. There's a case that just came out in Georgia about forced hysterectomies, and started with 3 women who then they tried to deport because they made this allegation in their court case, but their deportation was stopped, thankfully. But now there's over 30, last I believe, if I'm not mistaken, women who are saying that they had some kind of birth control or hysterectomy type treatment that they didn't ask for, that they did not medically need, that was given to them without their permission. So that is a major thing. Like, these are not small things. These are major human rights violations that are being committed on our country's land, in our country, by our government. So these are things that really need to have more attention and advocacy around, to fight for these people, because they're treated as though as if they don't matter, as if they have no rights. And it's just, it's really traumatic what they're doing. But the other thing, going back to this closed border, is the rapid deportations. So since COVID began and they closed the border, which I believe was end of February or beginning of March, I think it was, there's been over 200,000 people deported. They've been still doing, even with COVID, still been doing raids and deportations of people who are living here, some of whom have been living here a long time. And we've even heard stories about them raiding hospitals where people are going to get help for, COVID and COVID type symptoms, and that they've just been picking people up and deporting them. They're deporting people who are known to be contagious with COVID, who are known to have COVID and actually be actively symptomatic for COVID, which I read one article, or I think it was an opinion piece, that said, if we're deporting people who are actively symptomatic with a very contagious, known to be sometimes fatal disease, are we not sending biological weapons to other countries? But they don't care. They're just deporting everybody. The immediate turnarounds that I mentioned already at the border, we had one woman with us about a month ago now who crossed over the border 3 times. And the first 2 times, nobody even talked to her, bothered to ask her anything, interviewed her, asked her about asylum, nothing. They just sent her right back. And the 3rd time, she finally found somebody who was kind and sat down and talked to her about why she kept trying to cross over the border. And she was able to express her fear for her life. And they allowed her to stay, which was amazing. She got really lucky because they're not really letting anyone through. I think we've had since March, when the border closed, we've had maybe 8 to 10 families or individuals that have made it through the border, and that's it. They're not letting people through, regardless of what their story is, regardless of what their asylum claim is, which many people are claiming is illegal, because asylum law states that if you are on a U.S. territory, on U.S. land, and you ask for asylum, that your case has to be heard before you can be expelled or deported. So we are absolutely ignoring that law right now in the name of the CDC, even though technically it wasn't the CDC's order. Technically, the order came from the administration. What we're also seeing now, which we've never seen before, is children who are being deported alone. Now, it used to be if you were a child and you passed over the border by yourself, either because of a smuggler or because your parent sent you over for your own safety, it used to be that the government would take custody of those children and provide them shelter until we could find family to care for them. And that goes under a lot of child protection laws and different rulings and agreements from the past. Well, they're not honoring that anymore either. So there's been at least 9,000 children deported by themselves as young as 9 and 10, maybe younger, but those are the youngest that I know of. Which basically means they're either again sent back over to Mexico if they're Mexican, or they're deported back to their home countries. So there was a story about a 10-year-old little boy from Guatemala who was put on a deportation flight back to Guatemala by himself with no effort to try to contact his family or find out who his family, where they were, and dumped at an airport in Guatemala City, which, as anybody probably knows, is not the safest place for a young 10-year-old boy by himself. Turned out his mother was in Mexico, so kind of just overshot her completely. But I'm sure they never even asked the child if he even spoke. I don't actually know if he spoke Spanish or if he spoke an indigenous language, and this is happening all the time right now. And again, like I said, people being deported with COVID. That article down there, and I'm happy to share these slides after, but the one I linked is about these 9,000 children that they're deporting, violating all kinds of child protection acts. Some are calling Trump the trafficker in chief, because if you send children without protection, without parents, without any means of even trying to arrange for some kind of protection for them, you're basically just handing them with a bow over to the traffickers. That's kind of what you're doing. So that is a depressing summary of what is happening at the border and in our detention centers. This is what we've been seeing over the last however long we've been doing this. It feels like forever, 6 months or so. And it is, anyways, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other legislations that have come through this administration in the next section, but this is where we're at now, folks. I wish I could make it happier for you, but there's not much happening right here.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. This is really important. That I know that it's very important for all of us, especially me and the panelists in here, to talk about this because it's not being talked about enough. So now I'm gonna go to Professor Nandal real quick, because she actually taught a class this summer that I actually took part of this class called The Border and La Frontera. So my question to you, Professor Nandal, is what are some key takeaways that are most important for us to know about the humanitarian crisis happening at the border?
Yeah, I think what I just put in the chat, I just want everyone, to look at that because it's going to give you some insight into what Sarah was just sharing with us. So I want to highlight that, that a lot of the judges, many judges have retired and they've been replaced with Republican prosecutors that are not trained in immigration law. And so when these cases are brought before them, over 90% of them, it's just automatically no. So it's just totally in that sense too. I just wanted to highlight that's how things are changing. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is that each and every one of us as human beings, as citizens, have the duty, the way I look at it, have the absolute duty to do everything within our power to support human beings, to support human rights. So one way is to support Casa Alitas. If you can send donations, you can support, I'm sure later too, Sarah can tell us all the many ways that we can support the amazing work that they're doing right here in Richmond, right? Right now, Sagrado Corazon, Sacred Heart Center is in dire needs of support for their programs. Since COVID-19, they have really suffered a lot. They have a food bank that feeds the immigrants right here in Richmond, Virginia. And what I love about Sacred Heart too is that they ask that you please provide food that's culturally sensitive. So please don't bring food that the people don't know what it is. So do your research, look up what is the types of foods that people eat in Mexico and Guatemala, El Salvador, and then purchase those items and donate those items. And of course, if you haven't voted yet, vote. That's our duty as citizens. So that's my takeaway, that each and every one of us here tonight, ask yourself, what are 5 or 6 things that you could do this week that can make a difference for what is going on in our country right now?
Do you mind if I hitchhike on that just for the voting piece? Because it's so important. And we're not, I'm not going to get political or tell you how to vote, but obviously we have a big election coming up, but really we want to remember to vote at every level because the mayors and the governors and the congressmen and the senators today could be tomorrow's president, but also because how we vote for our mayor candidate and our governor candidate affects how immigrants in our own states are being treated. So it's very important to vote for our president, but we want to vote at every level as well. So pay attention to where, my advice is to pay attention to when your local elections come up as also.
Thank you so much to both of you. So definitely, I really relate to that. And everyone, please vote. So now, sorry about my dog Kronk. So now the same question goes for Michelle. No, actually, no, hold up. It goes to Megan Moody and Kellen Newman. So what are some key takeaways that are most important to know about the humanitarian crisis happening on the border? You both got 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay. I think a big thing that we need to acknowledge is that international human rights laws are being broken within the US here. If you look at their articles, there's at least 3 that I can think of on the top of my head where all individuals must be given the same rights and freedoms regardless of nationality, race, religion. So where they're from, it doesn't matter. We need to process them how we would process citizens within the United States. Another one is all individuals cannot be subjected to torture or cruel, inhumane treatment or punishments, which we can now confirm within detention centers through leaks, as well as just listening by case stories. And another one is individuals cannot be subjected to arrest, detention, or exile, especially if they're asylum seekers. It's against the law. After multiple genocides, the whole international community came together and each country signed saying that they would uphold these laws, and the US is clearly breaking them. So that, I think, is a big takeaway, is that we kind of need to, here in the US, acknowledge our own forms of, I mean, you could argue to say this is a form of ethnic cleansing, because there is a target on certain ethnicities, certain races, and nationalities, and even more so with this administration. They made it very clear that there is a target. Another big takeaway, looking at the humanitarian crisis, is the history of it. This isn't anything new. I think with this administration, we're seeing it's a lot more blunt and in our face, because this administration is a lot more blunt and in our face. But even during the Obama administration, the Bush administration, we can even date back to the 40s, the 20s, even when we were just a colony and not a formed nation yet, is that we do have this pattern of othernizing and dehumanizing immigrants. So I think that's another thing, is we can't just focus on, there's a pattern happening, and it's happening constantly, whether we want to see it or not. Yeah, so that's my take.
Again, Kelly?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from taking President Nadal's class and then also going to the border was, Sarah kind of alluded to this, but the media representation of what's happening isn't necessarily the most accurate. So just to do the most research more in depth about what you're reading and what you're looking at, because Sarah was mentioning that they gloss over big key facts and situations that are very relevant and important, that don't get the attention that they need, and then they focus on some other things that aren't as important, or that shouldn't get that much attention, like maybe the fly on a vice president's head during a debate. I feel like there's other things that obviously get very overlooked, and so I would just encourage everyone who attended this to continue to read the news, but then also look into more in depth about not just the headlines, but research it further, because it does provide a lot of insight on the realities of what's happening there, especially going down and seeing it with the tour at the border patrols and volunteering at Casa, Alitas, and then at the courthouses. To see it in person, it was very different from what you're reading in class or just on the news. So
Thank you, everyone, for that. All right, we're moving to our final topic of the night. Again, a reminder to everybody, this conversation will most likely run until 8:30, so most likely, but if you have to leave, I completely understand. I'm grateful for everyone who's here. So our third topic of tonight is immigration system under the Trump administration. And the question is for my panelists, and we're going to start with Sarah, but this question goes to all my panelists. How has ICE changed under the Trump administration, and what are the effects of the immigrant policies set by this administration? Sarah, you have the floor.
We can't hear you, Sarah.
How about now? Is that better?
Now we can. Okay.
I knew it would quit on me eventually. I said, as Megan has so expressed so well, our asylum system has been broken for a long time. But I would say that this administration is exploiting the breaks in the system to really go after immigrants in a rather cruel way that we haven't really seen to this extent. There have been, oh, there it goes, over 400 policies that have come out under this under this administration that can be considered anti-immigrant policies. Some of them address those with some type of visa here. It's making it harder for people to get green cards, to apply for citizenship, raising fees, making it harder for them to apply for assistance, things like that. And then some of them, a lot of them have to do with who is allowed to come to our country, the Muslim ban, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the limits to asylum, the limits to who can apply for visas, who qualifies, how many visas will be offered, the limit to how many refugees will accept all year. All of these things tied together really make for an overall largely anti-immigrant stance by this administration. This is a list of some of the major ones that have affected us here on the border, starting in 2018 with the metering program, which was one which required people to take a number when they show up at the border. You're running for your life and you need help, and you have to take a number and wait for 4 to 6 months at a time per family for your number to come up. There were at one point about 40,000 people in that program, and they were only accepting 40,000 numbers, I should say, 40,000 families. So they were accepting, to begin with, about 10 a day, and then it went down to like 1 or 2 a day. And it was very random. If you happen to have some way of bribing the people who were doing the metering, maybe you could be moved up the list a little bit. But basically you had to go every day and see if they were counting, if they called out your number, to know that then you could go through and ask for asylum. But if you weren't there to report every day, then you might miss it. You might miss your number and they don't call it again if you're not there that one day. So that forced people to stay right there along the border. And basically the pictures you've probably seen on the news of people in tents and camps and things like that formed because of these people waiting for their number to come up for their turn. Remain in Mexico happened after that. It started across the border as a pilot program in El Paso and San Diego in January of 2019. It hit our Tucson border in January of 2020. But it gradually spread across the whole border. And basically, instead of, as it used to be, as I said earlier, that people, after they asked for asylum, they waited for their asylum case here in the US. Instead, they were forced to wait back in Mexico for their asylum case. And the way that they were able to justify that, because again, asylum law states if you ask for asylum, you're just not supposed to be expelled or deported until your claim is heard and you have your day in court, so to speak. But what they said was, a little loophole that they found is that there was US-owned land in Mexico where they could put a court, which was often either like some kind of trailer or temporary building or a tent. So they call them tent courts, but they weren't all in tents, where then they would have a screen where a judge would basically zoom in, video conference in, a judge in the US, and that was how they would have their court. And so they said, since it was still US land, that it didn't count as them being expelled or deported, even though they were now living in these areas along the US border, which again, oftentimes in tents, often homeless, often no money, separated from their family, and very little access to legal help, very little access to translation assistance. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes they were given misinformation about where to go or when to report, or things were changed at the last minute and they weren't notified, because if you're living in a tent, you don't have an address for people to send you mail. And so it created really a havoc. And there's over 60,000 people in that MPP program. MPP stands for Migrant Protection Protocols, which is a very ironic name since it doesn't protect anybody. That's the official name of the program, but it's more commonly known as the Remain in Mexico program. Now, all those people, now that the border is closed, are on hold. Their tent sessions have been temporarily suspended. So there are no tent courts happening right now, at least not last I heard. And they're just there, not sure what to do. Now in Tucson, on the Tucson border, the reason it didn't get enacted here until January of 2020 is because there is no US owned land in Sonora on our side of the Mexican border, on the Mexican side of our side of the border. So they couldn't put a tent there. So what they decided to do was instead they were going to send all those people who passed through our border to El Paso and send them back over the border and to the tent court on the El Paso side of and the Texas, I keep getting that backwards, Mexican side of the El Paso border. That's where they were going to have them go for court. So, but they didn't want to drive them over there themselves. So they just dropped them off in Nogales, which is the city by us, and then said they had to figure out their own way to go to the 6 to 8 hour journey to the court in Laredo. But oftentimes when they were dropped in Nogales, sent back in this program, they weren't even told they were in the Remain in Mexico program. They were just dropped there. So people thought that maybe they'd been deported, like they had no idea what was going on. And they would go to one of the shelters that we partner with down in Mexico and report in, and they'd show them their paperwork and they'd say, no, you have a court date in 3 weeks. You have to go to El Paso like now. And they didn't know. They just had no idea. Nobody explained it to them. So the third country transit bars is kind of related to the last one there in November. These are the idea that they signed a whole bunch of agreements, Trump signed a bunch of agreements with the presidents of Central American countries saying that if you pass through another country on your way to the US border, you have to apply for asylum there first. So if you're from Nicaragua, but you pass through Guatemala to get here, you have to apply for asylum in Guatemala. Now, we know that the grand majority of asylum seekers that we have had over the past 2 years have been from Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. So they're having trouble keeping their own people safe. But now we're asking asylum seekers to seek asylum there, and then can't apply here until they do that first. So that actually caused, not only are we just turning people away saying you can't apply for asylum here because you went through these countries first, but they actually started sending people back in airplanes to those other countries and dropping them off at the airports and saying, without any idea of nobody there to receive them, no one there to help them, no one there to guide them in how to even do that, to apply for asylum in those countries, which they really don't even have. I mean, none of those countries even have a really good asylum process of even how to do that. So this led to a huge decrease in the number of people that were allowed through even before COVID hit. So if you look at, oh, I forgot about this one. So in June of this last year, the administration proposed another rule, which was 130 pages of asylum rules, which basically dismantled everything that asylum is, and said that they were going, and I don't really understand the legal part of this, I'm not a lawyer, but they said that these are the proposed laws, and they gave it was like a 30-day window for people to comment or ask questions or complain or whatnot. And a lot of us along the border, we mobilized people, and there were 70,000 comments made on this law. And because of that, it hasn't been put into place yet because they have to address every single one of those comments and every one of those concerns before they can make this into law. So the whole thought back in June was, if we can do this, like put a whole bunch of comments on there, we can stall this until a new administration comes in, and then hopefully it'll never go into effect. Because if this law passes, asylum in the United States is basically over. There's very few people who would qualify. It's really only if you have a lot of money and are from probably a white looking country that you might qualify. Maybe if you're like royalty, that maybe you'll qualify, but it's extremely limiting. It dismantles the entire asylum law as we have it. So here's hoping that it never goes into effect. It would be devastating for our country, and it would be very hard to undo. All of this is very hard to undo. So here, what you see here, this is January through July of this year. And you can see that when MPP started here in Tucson, that was January, and you can see our numbers already were starting to fall pretty significantly as MPP got more and more, and they started sending more and more people. For a while, they were just doing it like a few days a week, and then they started doing it every day. So the number of people that they were letting through, even through MPP, was drastically lower. And then by the time we get to March is when our the border closed. It was like early March. I think it was like, I don't know, second week or something. So then the numbers just plummet, and this is where we're at. And I know that we don't have the last few months on here because one of our summer interns put this together. But it would be about the same. We've had very few people coming through in the last few months. But this is one last thing I wanted to show you here. And this is the country of origin graph for families who were released to us at the shelter. So blue represents Central America. So we're talking Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador primarily. We've also had people from Honduras, but it used to be that those are the majority of our guests. The red there is for Mexico. And if you watch, you'll see what happens as they start putting into place all of these things, the third country agreements, the other things limiting the number of Central Americans that are able to actually apply here. And that portion of the pie gets significantly smaller. Now the numbers also of how many people are coming in got smaller, but just that, I think visually, to me, it's very impactful to just look at, this is what he's done, is he's limited specifically people from Central America, but asylum overall. I do have a slide on what you can do, but I don't know if you want me to jump into that now or if you want to continue this discussion first, Kevin.
I will continue the discussion, and that will be the last question that I'm going to ask everybody.
Perfect.
All right, thank you, Sarah, so much. All right, so for my panelists, I leave it up to anybody who wants to comment on how has ICE changed under the Trump administration, and what are the effects on the immigration policy set by this administration. I leave it up to my panelists. If he wants to comment, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to just give one example. In 2018, in November of 2018, Valeria Luiselli, a author, writer, professor in New York, who's of Mexican descent, she wrote a book, Tell Me How It Ends. It's also written in Spanish, 40 ensayos de los niños perdidos. She shared with us that one of the things that under this administration that they've done, and it goes right in line with what Sarah was just showing us, is that they have looked for any nook and cranny that they could take advantage of to be harsher. And this specific example is that, for example, when many of the children were coming up to the border, they would have like phone numbers that their mother or relative would sew into the back of their shirts, right? So that once they arrived, they would have that number so that they would not forget that phone number of their contact person in the US. Well, she shared with us that ICE found a way, and I think she said that this law was passed like on the eve of Thanksgiving or on the eve of Christmas. This is what, a government will do, right? When most people are not thinking about politics or whatever, they will kind of slide through these little laws, right? Where they can get away with these types of things. And so anyway, what happened was they did pass this law or policy or whatever you want to call it, so that they could then take those numbers, which normally were considered private property, right? Because it's a phone number on the shirt of the individual that no one would have the right to look at, touch, or do anything with. Well, they found a way to do it. So what they would do is they would call that number or find who that contact or relative or whoever it was. And if they were undocumented, right, they would grab them as well. So that's just one example, right, of the tactics that have been used so as to make life very, very difficult for these amazing human beings that are being treated terribly. So that was just another example I wanted to add.
Thank you for that, Professor Randall. Anybody else from our panelists want to go ahead? Go ahead, Megan.
So one thing I noticed around 2017, Trump made a proposition about how he wanted to return to a historical norm of immigration. And it was in reference to the census of 1890, I believe, where it curbed. It was a policy essentially where they didn't want people of a certain nationality because they thought they brought crime. It was completely I mean, just biased. But by passing that law, they were allowing a lot more people from the UK and Ireland and those European countries to come in. And that was around until like the 1960s, which we see a lot of his rhetoric through his administration about returning to like make America great again, that time period. So yeah, so I guess that my big takeaway was seeing his current administration is instead of reuniting families or allowing asylum seekers in, he wants it based on merit, which is a very small percentage of people coming to the US. And a lot of the people coming in, we mentioned, are asylum seekers. And a lot of what they're fleeing is when US and the Soviet Union kind of were taken control of the world back in the Cold War to fight capitalism and communism. A lot of the things that they're running from are based back from then. So I think we just see him having that same rhetoric over again of getting back to a time period where it was very biased and racist and under the cover of law and order. That stereotypical like Nixon and Reagan, where they pose things around law and order. He's using a very similar pattern to it in the immigration system.
Thank you, Megan. All right, anybody else from our panelists? Any last thoughts on this topic of immigration under the Trump administration? Any last thoughts from any of our panelists? No? All righty then, and that concludes our 3 topics. I do have one more question that goes for our panelists. And Sarah, what can we do? Sarah, you can start.
Sure. You hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me pull that back up. I think Anita actually mentioned quite a bit of this earlier, but just to reiterate, we definitely talked about voting, donating to organizations that assist immigrants. In the chat, there were a few comments about donating financially and making care packs and things, so I appreciate that. I responded to those. Normally, donations of even like used clothing drives are appreciated. I know we at Alitas are not accepting used clothing right now because of COVID, but new items are always appreciated. Volunteering for an organization that assists immigrants. I know Anita mentioned a few places, even just there in Richmond near you guys, that you can volunteer at. Hopefully by the spring, we'll have our out-of-state volunteer program up and running again. If you guys want to come out and see us again, we'll see how the spring goes. But advocating, telling people what you've learned, what you know, your experiences. I mean, I said this to the group that came out to visit us, that I was trusting them to be our ambassadors and to go back and tell people what they'd seen and what they'd experienced. Because people don't know. People in other parts of the country, they don't realize how bad it is and how bad people are being treated. And if they knew the stories, if they knew more about what's going on, then maybe it would change with how they think about immigration or how they vote or, those kinds of things. So, talk to your friends and your family and your school groups and your community groups and your clubs and fraternities and sororities or whatever you're involved in. Just talk about it. It doesn't have to be anything formal. I mean, this kind of event is fabulous, and I'm always excited to talk at something like this. But it can even just be, having coffee or have a movie night and watch something related to immigration. There's a lot of great movies actually right now about this. Netflix has been doing some amazing work. The Undocumented series that they did and Immigration Nation, they're both really good. They give a lot of great information. Look up on social media, different groups like Alitas that work with immigrants, the UNHCR, CWS is the group that I work with technically. UNICEF, Save the Children, like all of these people do a lot of work on the border, and you can follow their pages and see what's going on, what's happening in different, along the border as well as in other parts of the world. And keep yourself educated. I think that's what Kelly said, like do the research yourself, look up into seeing what's happening. I put in the chat also a book that's really good. It talks about the child separation that happened under Trump, which I did not talk about in my presentation actually, but I should have because it's what got me into this work. But there are resources out there if you look for them. They may not be the most popular headlines right now, but they're out there and you can find more information about all of this so that you have talking points when you are talking to people about what's going on. So I'm gonna throw this one up there. This is my email. Like I said, I'm very happy to share the slides with you all for later. That's not what I meant to do. I was trying to see my chat box and I can't get to it. But that's my email. If you want to email me with any questions or comments or thoughts, or you want to get involved at some point, please let me know. We do have virtual internships available. We've done some of those with Anita's classes before. And again, like I said, hopefully we'll be accepting people from out of state again in the spring or by summer at the latest. So hopefully. So maybe we'll see you all then.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. Anybody from our panelists on any thoughts on what can we do? Anybody from our panelists? Professor Nadal, right? Anyone?
Well, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but I think it never hurts to reiterate, right? Voten! Tiene que votar. You have to vote. Number one. That's the priority right now, right? And I hope, have you guys been following the news of all the things that are going on in Philadelphia and how they're trying to prevent people from voting? They're trying to prevent people from voting. That is where we're at right now in the USA. That's scary. Okay, so vote. And then after that, vote. And then, and then you know, if you want to, you know, donate, are you still accepting Costco cards, Sarah? Is that very helpful? Yeah. So if you want to go to Costco and buy a gift card, or Walmart and send a gift card, because, you know, because of COVID-19, you know, you don't want to send anything used, or it's just more efficient, right, to send gift cards or money rather than packages. So always donate. And I would say, this is just another step that I like to say, anywhere you go, if you walk into a store, a library, any organization, and you see someone of color that is mopping the floor, that is working at a hospital, that is stocking our shelves, tell them, thank you. Thank you for what you do. We appreciate you. There's nothing worse than being feel like you're invisible, that people walk by you as if you don't exist. I experience it all the time. So please help people to feel like they're human beings. Help people to know that they can be treated with dignity. Is just one other thing that I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Professor Nadal. Sarah, Megan, Professor Nadal, Nicole, Kelly, Michelle, I'm in gratitude to you guys for having this conversation with me and everyone who joined us on this important conversation. I also wanted to say that working, you know, being at Casa Alitas and experiencing that firsthand, it was something that really inspired me. And I just wanted to say to Sarah, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being just a great human being, first of all. And what can we do, right? Like Professor Nadal and Sarah said, go out and vote. Vote for those who cannot, because they need your help. And one of the things that I love, one of the reasons why I wanted to put in this program, you know, to do this program in the first place, is that, like Professor Nadal said this to me this summer, with everything going on right now in the world, in politics and everything with the pandemic, how do you not go crazy? How do you not lose it, right? Do good. Advocate for those one who cannot. And, you know, support each other. I'm getting emotional. Don't not do that right now. But again, please vote. Please do not stop talking about this. Keep talking about it. I also wanted to say we have dropped a link in the chat because we want to hear from you guys to see how we did in our event, and it will mean a lot for our organization to hear that. But once again, to our panelists, thank you. Muchísimas gracias. I really love everybody.
I actually had another way that people can help is to protest. There have been protests at the Farmville ICE Detention Center. Go out there, find a ride. You can also help organize a protest. We need average people out there, and get your friends to come out, make a safety plan if you're gonna go protest, help out with rent strikes, and help with rent relief that's happening. And also don't become complacent. Even if there's an administration change in November, do not become complacent. Do not think that just because they're blue, that they're gonna be helpful, that they're gonna be pro-immigrant, because you can't trust them to care. We have to care about each other. And that's where we can gain power.
I agree. Where the government lacks, that's when the community has to step in. I definitely agree with that. Well, I'm at this moment, I'm gonna pause the recording. Again, if everyone can fill out that form that is on the link, it will be really appreciated. We'd love to hear from you. And once again, to our panelists, thank you for taking the time. So this time I'm gonna pause my recording.